Amen.
Thank you so much, Father Innocent. Father Innocent Dresdel, I've known for many, many years, and he is the priest at Holy Resurrection Cathedral on Kodiak Island, which is just up the street from St. Herman Seminary. And he's been the priest there. That's been your only assignment, actually. You've been there.
I was in Anchorage for about 1.5 years. And
that's
then
right.
Here,
And you've been there. How long you've been there?
It's 17 or 18 years. I've kind of lost track.
And Father Innocent is also the caretaker of the relics that you'll see behind him. And he just came off, and we really appreciate his time. They just had a big pilgrimage up to Spruce Island last week, and then he was in Greece at Mount Athos, so he's pretty exhausted. And you're 5 hours behind us, but we're very thankful you just spend the time. There may be people coming in and out, but this is the last of our church schools. We've been traveling virtually all over the place. We were in Sitka, we were all over. And today we're going to learn about St. Herman of Alaska. And Father Innocent's going to kind of show you some stuff and show you the cathedral and tell you about the life of St. Herman and whatever he wants to do. And it is really a remarkable place he gets to live in. And he loves to go fishing. So I'm yet to catch a salmon with him. And so that's something we're going to have to correct one day. So
that's right.
Thank you, Father Innocent. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you. Yes, it's really a humbling honor to be with all of you today, even though it's virtually. It's amazing that we have this technology and can do this. So what I want to do is I'm going to give you a brief kind of little bit of a tour of the cathedral, in a sense, particularly the relics of St. Herman, which we are before right now, and give you a little bit of the history, as well as definitely open up for a time of questions. If you have any questions, I may or may not be able to answer them, but but we'll have that opportunity as well. So keep that in mind as we go through our virtual tour here and storytelling, and we'll make sure that there's time to do that a little bit later on. Holy Resurrection Cathedral here in Kodiak is North America's first Orthodox church. It was established specifically in September of 1794 upon the arrival of St. Herman and the monks that traveled with him from Vallam. They began their journey in January of 1794, and of course they crossed mainly by horseback across Russia and Siberia, coming to the harbor city of Irkutsk. And interestingly enough, most of the journey, timing-wise, was by land. It took a much greater amount of time, because once they left and started navigating on the Aleutian chain, favorable winds got them on Alaska on the chain fairly quickly, within a matter of really days, rather than months. And so when they first landed on Kodiak Island, they didn't actually land in St. Paul Harbor here in Kodiak. They actually landed in what's now, well, it's the Bay's Three Saints, which was the kind of the Russian intake harbor for the fur trade company, the Russian fur trade company. And that's about 40 miles to the west of Kodiak on the island. But they were only there, again, that's like, you think of Ellis Island or something equivalent like that. It wasn't an immigration post, but it was the gateway. And within days, they came to Kodiak, and the mission was officially established at that point in time. Baranov was the governor, and Baranov had a reputation for being very eccentric, and he knew his office, and specifically, he knew all of the honors that went with that office. And so he had a tendency to, we might say in this day and age, to be a little narcissistic, to the detriment of those serving under him. So the morale in the Russian fur trade, of the fur traders themselves, was driven by a kind of a high economic drive, not a humanitarian drive. And so when the monks arrived, what they found, and they found this in Unalaska before even coming to Kodiak, when they were stopped in Unalaska, was the native Aleuts were ready to be baptized. They had been exposed enough to the faith by this time, and specifically, even more specifically, For thousands of years, their oral tradition had told them, had been passed down to them, that God would visit them, that the Creator would make himself present. And so the roots of, and this is one reason why to this day, up in Alaska here, most people refer to the church as the Russian Orthodox Church. In Kodiak, you have most Alutiiq people, Alutiiq Aleut, Alutiiq being the more local name for the Aleut tribe here. Most of them are a mix of Russian or Norwegian and Native American blood. So you have what occurred, in some of that is because during the Russian fur trade, the men were worked to death, the Aleut men. And so the Russian fur traders would then marry the widows or take the widows as their wives. And then a little bit later on, as the Norwegians started coming and the Norsemen started exploring Alaskan waters, they came and never left, and they settled. And so you have this very interesting dynamic here on the island where you have, many times people assume that the church doesn't have as many natives as it does in it, because many of the natives here that are genuinely native are fair-skinned, not darker-skinned. And that's why, because you have a mix of Russian and Norwegian blood. And then if that's not clue enough, then when you start seeing the last names, you have last names like Kashiverov, Nikiforov, and then you suddenly have Hawkinson. And so it's really, really interesting to see that mix. So when the monks arrived in 1794, they found a situation in which the native men and women were being exploited for economic means. And being good Christian monks, they set to right that wrong. And so that caused tension right from the start. Right from the start, the mission here was, because there was this struggle. Essentially, you can think of it this way, particularly St. Herman came and disrupted a very comfortable economic machine that had been well oiled by this time through the Russian fur trade. So the embrace of the church itself of the faith was literally almost instantaneous upon arrival. And that's one of the unique marks of the mission here in Kodiak in particular, but it also was experienced as like St. Juvenali and others went out, and St. Yakov went out into Alaska further. That same reception was given. Now, in the exception of St. Juvenali, who you see right behind me in the icon here on the left, with the St. Juvenali and then St. Peter the Aleut, St. Juvenali was martyred, of course, on the mouths of the Johnson and Kuskokwim rivers. And the story goes, he wasn't here in Kodiak very long before he and some of the other monks traveled to expand the mission here in Alaska. And before he went to his eventual martyrdom, just above the church here is a mountain called Pillar Mountain. It's about 1,400 feet. It's literally right above town. You can literally start walking, and about 5 blocks from the church here, you're already starting up the mountain. That's how close it is. And there's a wonderful account that maybe you've heard of St. Herman accounting all of them in the initial group going up to the mountain. And an argument ensued about who would go where. And the argument was not one of animosity, but it was one of zeal. And as St. Herman accounts this in a letter, he laughs because he's overjoyed by their zeal, arguing who gets the islands, who gets the mainland, who gets the southeast of Alaska. Because this state is very, very large. I know people talk about that, but when you see the state of Alaska superimposed over the lower 48 as a state outline, it goes from Minneapolis to Southern California, all the way down to, I think it's either Oklahoma or deep south. I mean, it geographically encompasses a very, very large amount of land.
How big is Kodiak?
What's that?
How big is Kodiak Island?
Kodiak Island is the second largest island in North America. So for perspective on that, the largest is the Big Island, Hawaii. So it's the square mileage. I can't give you it.
It's big.
Yeah, it's big. You can fly from one end of the island to the other in about in a twin engine plane in about 25 minutes. It has what's called a backbone, which means mountain-wise, it's a volcanic island, as are all of the islands and mountains in Alaska. And the top elevation, I think, on that is like we're about 4,500 feet. And we actually, up in the central part of the island, there's glaciers year-round. So it's very, very diverse land. It's most of the island is a protected wildlife refuge. There are 7 villages, including Kodiak, on the island. About 13,000 people at any given time are on Kodiak Island in residence. And of those 13,000, around 2,000 are Coast Guard. It's the largest Coast Guard base in North America, is also just down the street here in Kodiak. And so in our day and age, you know, traveling from inter-village on the island here, there are no roads connecting the villages. So it's by boat or by plane, sometimes float plane, sometimes wheeled planes. With the exception of Kodiak, all of the airports have gravel runways. So you're not talking international airports. Kodiak, yes, you can fly 737 in here. So it's, you know, Kodiak ends up being the regional hub. And even in the time of the Russian fur trade, this is why it's a approachable harbor, even though it's Kodiak has the only cargo crane that has to unload the big container ship. I say ship because only one at a time comes in. There's not room for any more. It's exposed to the open sea. It's exposed to the Gulf of Alaska. It is not in a protected harbor. And so sometimes even we have the logistics issues of if they can't safely dock the ship goes on, and we lose a lot of supplies for that particular week or month. But take that back to 25, 30 years ago, and of course you didn't have the modern conveniences of airplanes, you didn't have the modern conveniences of outboard engines, inboard engines, super ships, container ships, etc. You had sails. A round trip letter from Kodiak to Moscow would be about 18 months. And that's if the ship didn't wreck, the ship didn't sink. So, you know, the primary source of transportation for the monks once they got here to go intra-island was a bidarka, which is, we think, kayak, and you're pretty close. It's a kayak literally on steroids. Bidarkas were made, and it's the same thing you'll see if you see the pictures of like a whale hunt. Those are bidarkas. They're very long, they're very narrow, they're very stable. And one of the reasons why they're long is so they can cut through the sea swells that are so consistent here. So we haven't really advanced much in the seamanship department from the time of the monks, other than we fuel our boats now and we can go faster. And we have fancy electronics to get through the fog and things like that. However, even all those modern conveniences still stop us in our tracks multiple times. And so, yeah, like I mentioned right before we started with the pilgrimage, I had to make the decision for 120 pilgrims within less than 12 hours before we were to depart. And it gets a little stressful when you look at the weather forecast, because you might be able to get there safely, but you got to get everybody home. And as I'll mention in just a moment, Monk's Lagoon is not a place where there's a dock. St. Herman, when he chose to go to Spruce Island from Kodiak, did so precisely because it was hard to get to, and he wanted to live as a hermit. And so he knew he could be secluded there, even though God had other plans for him at that time. So given all of that, once the missionaries kind of scattered, St. Herman was one of the ones that stayed. And about the same time, this was about 20 or so years, 15 to 20 years into the mission, St. Juvenali was martyred. Father Yosef, who was the original priest coming with the monks, was sent back to Russia to be, and consecrated a bishop to be the first bishop of Alaska. And the ship made it all the way to just not far offshore here near Kodiak, and it sank, and all were lost. Even Saint Herman speculates about that particular accident, where he makes it clear, because we know it was close to Kodiak, because he states in his letter that pieces of the ship washed ashore. And there is some speculation that was possibly sabotage, because there were government officials on board as well. It wasn't just the newly elected bishop. And so this is a reason why in 2001, the Holy Synod of Bishops of the Orthodox Church in America elevated Holy Resurrection Parish here in Kodiak to cathedral status. Because had Bishop Yosef made it, this would have been the historic see of Alaska, this church, rather than Sitka. Sitka, St. Michael's Cathedral in Sitka is the historic see. And as you probably know, the first bishop of Alaska was, that was his see, and that was, of course, St. Innocent. And so the timing of everything, it's fascinating. Kodiak, the mission in Kodiak was always a struggle. And St. Herman had his ups and downs with Baranov, but by the end of Baranov's term as governor here and overseeing the Russian fur trade, he had a tremendous respect for St. Herman. And St. Herman also, in his letters and writings, you can see it was mutual. There was an understanding. But St. Herman, by the time Baranov left and was reassigned, St. Herman at that time wanted to leave Kodiak and go to Spruce Island, which is about 7 miles away. Between Kodiak Island, though, are 3 ocean currents, the Gulf of Alaska, and very treacherous seas for many months out of the year. So even though it's close mileage-wise, it's like another world. It's like another world. In doing so, and I'm going to move a little quickly here because I don't want to run out of time. St. Herman, well, I mentioned earlier, he wanted to live as a recluse. He wanted to live out the rest of his days, because when he arrived in 1794, he was 40 years old. And he died at 81. So he ended up living more of his life by 1 year than here in America than he did in his home. And he never returned. He never went back. So once he arrived in Alaska, he never left. And when he got to Spruce Island, he picked Monk's Lagoon, as I mentioned, because it's very, very hard to get in and out of. It's very protected, and he truly was a simple monk, and he wanted to live out the rest of his days in ascesis, spreading for all mankind. But at that time, it had started, even when he was still here in Kodiak, there was a great epidemic, and many children were orphaned. And it became so overwhelming, they came to St. Herman, and he was compelled to start an orphanage. And so in Spruce Island, in Monk's Lagoon there, he started an orphanage for boys and for girls. We believe the boys' orphanage was up the trail a little bit in the forest, and the girls was more down by the shore. St. Herman pioneered gardening, turnips, potatoes, peas. There's a tradition here on his feast day that you're supposed to make pea pie. I don't like peas, so that's a tradition I don't really do, but nevertheless, he pioneered using seaweed for fertilizer, and there's so many wonderful things that he produced. But while he was over there on Spruce Island, that was the time in which some of the miracles started happening in his life, during this life. And so by the time he went over to Spruce Island, he would have been in his mid-50s, maybe 60. And you think about that, our modern age, when we think of the new 50 is 70 or something like that, right? We have all these conveniences and everything, even though we're being pretty humbled right now with this latest pandemic as a people. But the idea is, he didn't have all that. He didn't have MRIs and CAT scans and things like that and all the modern conveniences we have. It was traditional medicines, of which there was great knowledge here. And so but he had this strength, even as an elderly monk, to the point where, they would see him carrying whole trees on his shoulder. They would see him feeding the bears by hand. And these are things that are secretive, because he would never have exposed this. In his cell in Monk's Lagoon, he had a board that was his bed. But whenever somebody surprised him with a visit, he would quickly take that bed and he'd put it on top of the stove and make it look like the table, because he didn't want anybody to know that he slept on a board. And he used a stone or logs for his pillow. Very, very traditional. When I'm being recently on the Holy Mountain, and seeing and meeting some of the recluses and even some of the traditional monastics there, these are things you read about, but when you actually see a human being doing this or seeking to struggle to live his life out, it brought it home to me all the more. Because when you walk through the forest in Monk's Lagoon, you feel the presence. You feel the prayer to this day. If you've ever talked with somebody who's walked the trail up to the grave of St. Herman, they'll talk to you about the way the moss hangs on the trees. And as you go up the trail, because it's not a steep incline, but there's a slight incline. And as you go up the trail from the beach, from the shoreline, you can hear the crashing waves up until you get about maybe a third of the way up the trail. And suddenly you come over this knoll in the forest, and it's silence. Just quiet. You might hear the occasional bird, you might hear a little fox rustling, but it's quiet. And it's one of the few places on earth, I believe, that really still has that sense of quiet. My daughter Amelia and I took Bishop Alexis about almost 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years in October when he visited. We had the honor of taking him over to the island. And we had to, the seas were too strong, so we had to put him ashore, and then I just had to stay with the boat. So he got to walk up the trail by himself and then come back down about an hour and a half later. And when we picked him up, I knew something had happened, because he was just quiet, but his face was just radiating, and I didn't want to disrupt whatever had happened. And, I navigated the waters back to town, going pretty fast, and it's pretty noisy with the outboard. But when you get to town, you have to go through a long channel. Quieted the outboard down to an idle. And one thing that he said to me that struck me and has always gone with me is, he said, Father, I spent 10 years on the Holy Mountain. I never experienced quiet like I just did on Spruce Island. And I have to tell you, I thought, on the Holy Mountain, But now last month when I was there, I realized what he was talking about. Because there's constantly activity. There's constantly pilgrims visiting. You even hear the bells in the middle of the night at different monasteries at different hours, depending on their particular, maybe it's a patronal feast they're celebrating or this or that. And it's beautiful, but it gets kind of noisy. And so when he said this, I thought, wow, that's really spectacular. So that gives you an idea of how much St. Herman wanted to live as a hermit. He chose a very quiet place, and he sanctified that place through his prayers. That's a sanctity that we still experience. And it's, over the last 11 years now, I've been taking pilgrims. I've gone the route so many times now, it's muscle memory, on a physical level. But what doesn't change is each pilgrim's experience brings it all back to me anew, like it's the first time. And it's a tremendous, tremendous blessing to have that opportunity to experience their healing in a way, be a little part of it. And I've seen some really important decisions made in people's lives. And I wish I'd been keeping a log of everybody, but I haven't. So as a result, I can't share all the stories, but there's some amazing stories out there, and God knows, and of course, St. Herman knows. What I'd like to do and take a moment to do right now is to show you a little bit more of the reliquary, and I'm going to try not to disturb the camera too much. But the reliquary itself is carved in the shape of a boat. And we have two carvings on the reliquary depicting two miracles, one from St. Herman's lifetime and one after his death. The one on the left is an image of Saint Innocent from the sea. There was a ship with about 80 some people on board. This was not a cruise ship. This was a merchant vessel, which means that everybody on that vessel was under the deck, no windows. And they were under that deck for weeks because, again, it's a sailboat. They didn't have engines. They didn't have steam engines on these vessels at this time. And so two babies were born during this journey, and they were running out of food and water. And this was soon after Saint death. And so they were near Bruce Island. And Saint Innocent went out on the deck and he prayed, Blessed Herman, if it be God's will, pray that the seas would subside and the winds would become favorable. And immediately the seas subsided and the wind shifted and they were able to come into St. Paul Harbor. And I say St. Paul Harbor by pointing this direction because it's literally 2 blocks from where I'm standing right now. So it's that close. Everyone was saved on that vessel and arrived here by the grace of God and through those miraculous intercessions. The second is, forgive me, that was of course a miracle from after St. Herman's passing. The second on the right is very, very famous miracle. And let me just, and this is St. Herman placing the icon of the Theotokos after an earthquake, and the water was going out. And when tsunamis happen, the water withdraws before it comes back in. And so St. Herman took the icon down to the shore and put it in the sand and said the water will not cross that line. And when the tsunami wave came, it stopped right there. We don't know the exact icon, but I'm going to take you over because we do have one of St. Herman's icons here at the cathedral that is here because in Bruce Island, it can't be, there's no heat in the church, but this was, again, St. Herman's personal icon of the Mother of God and of course Christ. And we don't know if this was the icon he used or not. The specific icon has not been revealed. So those two miracles are depicted on the reliquary. And then the chains which St. Herman wore, about 11 to 12 pounds, this was wrought iron. And the cross was on his chest and the square here was on his back. Now, this is, again, goes back to his death. The night that he died, that's when these chains were discovered. You may remember or have all read that Saint Herman and Saint Nectaria, or Saint Seraphim of Sarov, who we have an icon of Saint Seraphim here right by the reliquary, had the same spiritual father, Father Nazarius. And even though Saint Seraphim and Saint Herman never met in this life, they were contemporaries with the same spiritual father. And so Saint Herman had that blessing from his spiritual father to wear this cross against his body under his cassock. It was discovered the night that he died by his disciples tending to his body and preparing his body for burial. Another thing that occurred the night that Saint Herman died was a pillar of light shone straight from Spruce Island, and it was witnessed here in Kodiak by villagers here in Kodiak and the villages of Afognak and Uzinki. And those are all villages within a radius of about 25 square miles. Then we also have on the reliquary St. Herman's Taunturing cross. And this is a riza that contains what's left of the wooden cross that he received at his monastic tonsure. When a monk is tonsured, they receive the cross, and then the rest of the night they hold the cross in their hands and stand at vigil and prayer in the church or monastery in which they're tonsured. And on the back side, which helps date it, are carvings. You have on the top the chalice, you have a rooster and a stylus, the spear and the sponge, a ladder image, another vase, and a lantern. These were all images associated with the church in Russia during the 18th century. And see it reflected a lot in the artistic work at the time. which dates the Riza itself back to that time. And so we don't know for sure, but probably St. Herman was given this Riza. It might have been before he traveled, but for sure by the time he traveled, given the long journey ahead. Now, if you look closely, you're going to see some damage to it. It's broken there. There's another spot right here where it's creased, right there where my thumb is. Unfortunately, this part here is fairly new. We had in 2015 a young man who had a drug addiction problem, broke into the cathedral, broke most of the windows, and desecrated the altar, and also did his best to desecrate any cross that was in the church. Ironically, he protected and didn't do anything to the icons of the Mother of God. Matter of fact, he placed them strategically as though he knew that they were holy, yet desecrated even the reserved sacrament that was on the holy altar. So he bent the Riza of the cross upward, and he also the crosses you venerate, the Father brings out after liturgy, those wonderful altar cross. He took the two we had, which had just been recently given to us by I can't remember the Archbishop's name from Russia. Really, really nice crosses, and he bent them upward to where they were almost a U shape. It made no sense, but demonic actions like that usually don't make sense. So thanks be to God, our deacon was able to repair it without much further damage. He just happens to be a metallurgist, so on the side, so God provides. And then finally, we have the St. Herman Scuffia, which is in the glass container here. And it has a little bit of fire damage. It was already here in the cathedral in 1943 on display the night of the fire. And so it was rescued from that at that time. So the veneration of St. Herman was happening from before he even died, really. And so his canonization in 1970 was a natural outpouring of the oral tradition and the stories and the veneration of him. Here in Kodiak to this day, the faithful refer to him as Appa. Let's see what else. The lampada, much more recent, was a gift of Patriarch Alexei II of blessed memory when he visited, I believe it was in 1993. Father Eric, you might know that date better than I. Either 93 or 90, I think it's 93. Yeah, okay. And so that's a special, very special gift. At the time that he visited, I mentioned earlier, getting to and from Monk's Lagoon could be very, very challenging, even though it's only about 7 miles away. A storm came up, but because the patriarch is considered, it was considered a state visit, the Coast Guard landed him on the beach in a Coast Guard helicopter. And there's one village on Spruce Island, the village of Usinki. And those faithful there, almost all of which are descendants of St. Herman's orphans, were able to hike the trail some 7 miles to the other end of the island and have a very blessed, quiet pilgrimage with the patriarch and a Coast Guard helicopter there on the beach. So it's kind of interesting. I miss those days out here. Then I brought out the chalice, and I did this for a reason. This is a silver gilded chalice, and we have a chalice and disco set. And let's see if I can get it up to the camera so you can actually see it. I don't know if it'll focus very well or not. 1803. Yeah, just a minute, Zara, and I'll get to your question. 1803 is inscribed on the bottom of this chalice. So this was a gift from what was the equivalent of the Secretary of State at the time in Russia upon their visit to the mission here. And what I like to say about this chalice set is it's not in a museum. We use this at every liturgy. And so St. Innocent communed from this chalice, St. Herman communed from this chalice, on and on it goes. We believe St. Peter the Aleut communed from this chalice even. Mm. So it really is, a special thing. So when you're able, God willing, to make pilgrimage to Kodiak, I always assure people, even if you're not able to get to Spruce Island and go to the spring or venerate and take some soil from St. Herman's grave where he had formerly been buried, you do have the opportunity to venerate his relics, to commune with this chalice. It's just, God is one. Right.
That's my soil from the grave.
Yes. So, okay, wait, a question. Was it Tara there? Question?
And I commune from that chalice too. But go ahead, Zenaida.
Yeah.
Her it's not
Do you
working.
have a question?
You have your question?
Is it Zara? Okay.
Zara.
Well, does anybody have any so far?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Father, I wanted to ask about the reliquary. Who carved the reliquary? Who carved? Yeah.
It's a good question, and unfortunately, I don't know the name of the man. I know he's passed away. He was in Pennsylvania, so I think Father Joseph made the arrangements originally. Metropolitan Theta, I'm not sure, but I know that it was because one of the things that was planned was there was supposed to be a canopy. So these corner points actually pop off, but of course it was never completed. So interestingly enough, though, the coffin inside, I met the daughters of the man who made the coffin. And it was a strange thing. It was a number of years ago. There was a woman standing right here, and I was doing cruise ship tours, which is, think of a trip to like Disneyland or Disney World, right? You're standing in the same, and there's that one employee saying the same things over and over and over again. That's what a day's like when cruise ships come in. You might be 8 hours of just repeating this brief highlights of the history of the cathedral and St. Herman's life, and repeating that about every 20 minutes. Well, she was standing here for about 3 hours. So finally, I just pulled myself away from the crowds through here, and I just said, "Is there any questions or anything I can do to assist?" And she just started crying, and she said, "Can I see the coffin?" Now, that's not a question I usually get from cruise ship passengers. It's just not something you expect. So I knew right away there was a specific reason. I said, "Of course." So I just lifted the center icon off, and she just wept and wept and wept. And I just waited, waited for her to, because I knew she was something she wanted to express. And sure enough, she said, "The last time I saw this, I was 5 years old, and Daddy was making it in our living room in Anchorage." So I got disrupted, and by the time I came back to get her contact information, she was gone. And I thought, oh, I just lost a piece of more of the history that I could have gotten a little bit more of. Fast forward to like just 2 years ago, her sister came, and I got her number finally. But so I could say I know a little bit about the coffin, but unfortunately the carving itself of the reliquary, I don't even know the man's name. I don't think I met him. He was still alive when I was at St. Ticon's, but I don't believe our paths crossed at that time.
So I have one more question. I wonder, you said earlier that you've witnessed some important decisions. And so I realize that may be private or something, but is there anything public?
Yeah, there's one sure, certainly, of course. So about 3 years ago, I had been working with closely with Dan Christopoulos, who at the time was the American Program Director with IOCC, International Orthodox Christian Charities. And he's now with OCMC. And over the years, Dan had been telling me about an individual who wanted to come, and we were working on the arrangements to just get this person up here. And finally, Dan calls me and he says, "Okay, he's coming and he's bringing his 2 sons. He needs to make a decision about which son is going to take over the business." Well, it turns out this is a pretty substantial business. To give you an idea, without telling you what the business is, They were here on the island for 4.5 hours to go to Monk's Lagoon and back. And they flew in his private jet from the lower 48 directly to Kodiak and then back home, same day. And not close at all, not like Seattle, like way down there in the lower 48. So for those of you wondering what I'm saying, lower 48 in Alaska, that's how we refer to the mainland of the United States. So we always say lower 48. So you can call us the upper one or something. I don't know. It doesn't really translate, I suppose. But so we made the arrangements. And at this time, so to give you an idea, I need to give you a little bit of a background. One of the hats I wear is I'm a licensed merchant mariner. I'm a captain. So I've been licensed with the Coast Guard. I had to go through quite a rigorous training, and I'm certified to skipper vessels up to 50 gross tons, which is pretty large ships. I mean, you're not talking cruise ship size at that point, but you're talking like, think large fishing seiners, things like that. And the reason why I had to do that was because for many years, taking pilgrims over to and from Monk's Lagoon without having that captain's license, I took on all the liability if something would happen. And even worse, Marushka and my daughters took on the liability as well, involuntarily. So a number of years ago, I secured my captain's license. And then we got a blessing from the bishop to start an LLC so that if something were to happen, I wouldn't lose everything, lose the boats and things, but the LLC could protect, the family, at least the family assets, what little we have. So during this time, I am building a boat, I'm operating a small boat, and I'm essentially leasing what's called a landing craft from some parishioners here who actually built the boat. A father-son built the boat specifically to take pilgrims to Monk's Lagoon. So it's like the perfect boat for what we're doing. And at the time I started using it, basically they said, use it so you can buy it. And it was about $50,000. And so I didn't have the opportunity, because I'm full-time dean of the cathedral here. That's my full-time job. I can't just run a business on the side that's going to pay for a $50,000 boat. And so this man and his 2 sons fly up. We make the pilgrimage. On the way back from the pilgrimage, before they headed back to the airport and got on the plane, he asked me, tell me more about your operations here, what you're doing. I said, well, what you just experienced is the main thing that I do. And I said, here's the means by which we do it, and the expenses are great. I mean, the boat is not a word. For those of you who know about boats, you know what I'm talking about. Boat is an acronym for break out another 1,000. Always just the way it works. And so as we got back to shore, he also told me the story, and he'd made a decision with his 2 sons about which one would take over the business. The other son, interestingly enough, pulled me aside, and his experience here, he said, I think I'm going to become a monk. So it was really, I think, a pretty easy decision for Dad in the end. And they both had an encounter at Monk's Lagoon. So that was I think early October of that year. Fast forward to about December 28th, and I get a call from a number I didn't recognize in the lower 48, and the woman on the other end of the phone says to me, Father, I'm so-and-so's accountant, and it's the end of the year, and they're very generous people, and they told me to contact you. I understand you're trying to purchase a boat. And I said, yeah. She said, will 50,000 be enough? And I dropped the receiver on the phone, literally on the kitchen floor. I was like, just stunned. So the boat was paid for in one check. So, I attribute 2 miracles to that, and they're not necessarily, there've been healings, there's lots of healings. So matter of fact, I just received an email where it was like a 2-stage healing, and they attribute it both to the spring water over in Monk's Lagoon, but also to the reliquary right here. And it's very, very interesting. These things are fairly common. One of the more common miracles that I see is people are drawn to the faith. So this past Monday, I had the most stressful decision process to make to try to safely make a final decision whether we were going to get people back and forth. And one of the reasons why it was so stressful was because the boat and skipper that I had always worked with and that I knew well and had known for years had to cancel. But he recommended another skipper. So on Sunday night, literally during the vigil, I was outside behind the church on the phone with this new skipper trying to negotiate how we were going to do this, not knowing him even. And so the next morning when we pick everybody up Monday morning at 6 a.m., he comes over and I'm starting to load my boat, which is much smaller. His is a 54-foot version of my boat. My boat's 24. His is 54. You fit 75 people on the deck of that boat. And he did, and brought him right into this very treacherous lagoon. It was a miracle. It was amazing to watch. When he stuck his head out the cabin to start taking on passengers, Mariska Veronica, my wife, was coordinating everybody, getting them in life vests and getting them down to the shore. And she looked at me and she's like, I taught all 4 of his kids. Yeah. Public school district. So it's like, oh my goodness. Okay, we already have a connection here. Well, when we got back, I texted him and I just said, you know, Captain Nick, thank you. Your professionalism, your competence, your deckhand, you guys were amazing. And when we first got there, I was doing what we call ship to shore. I was helping take people off of his boat and take them to the beach. And at the end, he and his deckhand both asked, is this private or can we come up the trail? And I said, well, absolutely, come up the trail. And they were at liturgy with us. So that evening, I'm talking with them, and he says, I want to know more about Orthodoxy. I want to know more about this history. He said, what I saw, what I experienced in being in part of these people's lives for this obviously very, very special thing, he said, I want to understand this. I don't understand what just happened today, but I want more. And that's the kind of thing that happens. You know, St. Herman is simple. He's a humble monk. He was never a priest. He was never ordained. He was just obedient. He was faithful in the little things. And as a result, he's been entrusted with much. And I take comfort because Kodiak is not an easy place to serve. Father Eric can give testimony to this. It is a place of constant spiritual battle, constant warfare, constant struggle. And yet, you know, one of the things I take comfort in is that it was in St. Herman's time as well, because that keeps my pride from going crazy and me taking things personally when they can be very personal at times. And so it's a great comfort, you know, to have that present. And I want to personally, you know, invite each and every one of you, if you can make the pilgrimage, I can guarantee you it's probably easier to make a pilgrimage somewhere in Russia than it is to Spruce Island. You know, you have to get out of your comfort zone. We do something, Metropolitan Tikhon said it to me just the other day. He said, we do something here that's done nowhere else in the Orthodox world. You know, we take people to a wild island without a dock that literally faces the Gulf of Alaska. If you leave Monk's Lagoon and go a little bit to the right, the next land you're going to see is Hawaii. If you go a little bit to the left, you're getting to Seattle. But there's nothing in between. So it really is a very special experience. So yeah.
Sarah, what's your question, Sarah? Can you type it in? You've been very patient. Sarah, we can't hear you. Can someone type your question in? Okay, anybody else have questions while Sarah's figuring out what to do? And then you could see the cathedral in the back. You could see the iconostas, and we really appreciate you being able to show us all of this. It's a beautiful place. Yep, you could just take a little bit of a look there.
This current structure was completed during World War II in 1946. Fire burned the previous structure from the 1800s in 1943. So
happens a lot up in Alaska.
That's right. Oh, I'll show you this. I'll take the phone off here and show you the original icon for the canonization that Archbishop Job of blessed memory.
Oh, yes, with the helicopter in it.
Well, no, this is the one. That's the one at St. Tikhon's. This is the one on him standing on Monk's Rock there.
Oh, yeah, that one. Yep.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Any other questions from anybody? Oh, now, see, Father, they're still on old calendar there, so on the Julian calendar. So while we have Dormition tonight, they're getting ready for Transfiguration.
Yeah, today's our first day of the fast. That's right. And then we have Transfiguration, I think, on Thursday, I believe, this Thursday, coming Thursday. And so, yeah.
Yep.
And all of Alaska is still in the old calendar with the exception of Juneau. Juneau is on the new calendar. That's the one church in Alaska that's on the new calendar. So
excellent. Well, Father Innocent, would you lead us in a prayer? And then we thank you for your time and your I know it's early for you, but we really appreciate this and having this opportunity to see these wonderful things and to hear the stories. And I can't thank you enough for doing this.
Oh, thank you, Father. It's been a joy. And I pray that you've been blessed by this time. And I think what we'll do is, in closing, we'll sing the magnification to St. Herman here at his Relics.
Thank you. And please make sure you pray for all of us before St. Herman and the parish of St. Gregory, and ask for his prayers for our community to continue to be healthy and to grow.
Absolutely. I assure you of that. Keep your prayers as well. Thank you. It's a joy to be with you all today.
Okay.
We bless you. We bless you. O venerable Father Herman, and we honor your holy memory, instructor of monastics and converser with angels. Amen.
Amen. Through the prayers of our Holy Father Herman, have mercy on us and save us. Amen. Thank you all so very, very much. See everyone in church in an hour.
Joyous feast.
Thank you.